who are you going to vote for?
In November, I'm going to be voting for Joe Biden. That's what I'm going to be doing.
There was a pretty remarkable moment during one of TYT's election night coverage episodes. The night was not going very well for Bernie, and it was basically clear that his bid for the Democratic nomination was all but lost. It was at this point that our friends over at TYT contemplated the future of the progressive movement.
Somebody asked who will carry the torch next for progressives. Oh boy.
Tough one.
So right now, I don't see anyone on the horizon. AOC's too young, so we have no leader. But remember, we have to have that leader appear, build up name recognition, run,
like in
and
Congress,
and then run again, and then run again. So that's why I say Medicare for All is not dead for 4 years; it's dead for at least 10 years. How is anyone going to be able to build up enough name recognition to be able to run for president and have any chance of winning?
It's pretty remarkable that the current leader of the movement will be far too old to run for president in 2024. He was arguably too old this time around, and that the heir apparent won't even be old enough, and no one fits the bill in between. Arguably, progressives do have some up-and-coming stars, but as of now, they have no bench to look to. Why is this? Well, there are two reasons, so far as I can tell. The first one will be familiar to those of you who watch this channel. The online left has effectively impossible standards for virtually anyone to meet. The second one is even more straightforward. Progressives hardly ever win races. It's extremely difficult to find a serious presidential candidate who's progressive because there are almost no progressive senators or governors. We don't have many progressive senators or governors because we don't have many progressive congressmen or mayors. And there's a dearth of progressive mayors and congressmen because there are so few progressives in our states and local governments. It's funny because the online left is always talking about what losers the corporate establishment neoliberal centrist Democrats are.
Remember, this is Claire McCaskill. She's a corporate Democrat who lost to a Republican, and then now she goes on all these news shows and explains to Democrats, let me tell you something, let me tell you how you win. All right, I'm gonna tell everybody, because I'm an expert on this, I'm gonna tell everybody what we gotta do to win as Democrats. Bro, you just lost. You just lost. She's lectured the left endlessly. Let me tell you, see, I know. No, you don't. You just lost. You should teach a class on how to lose, because that's all you got.
I don't like Claire McCaskill either, and she did lose her last election by 5 points. That said, it's really not fair to call her a loser. She's gotten elected statewide as a Democrat in a red state 4 times. Stack this up against the dismal record of the Justice Democrats, an organization that Kyle co-founded, and you'll see that she knows quite a bit more about winning than they do. Not only have the Justice Democrats lost the vast majority of their races, they have yet to flip a single seat from red to blue. They only have 7 members currently serving in Congress, 2 of whom were incumbents prior to the founding of the organization. Their one big success story, AOC, won her primary by less than 5,000 votes. Granted, her opponent was a very powerful Democrat, and that victory was impressive in a number of ways. It's also true that he was an absentee congressman who didn't even live in the district. Long story short, progressives don't have a great track record of winning. Maybe Kyle should be the one teaching the course on how to lose elections. But of course, it never counts when a progressive loses. Whenever the establishment candidates lose, it's because they're out of touch with the American people. But whenever a left-wing candidate loses, it's because the voters were manipulated in some way. In fact, that's fundamentally how the online left views American politics. They think their biggest problem is one of communication. The 2 things they complain about most are the media and campaign spending. In fact, on May 5th, Cenk rolled out his 5-year plan for the progressive takeover of America.
The reason I say it's about 5s is, yes, this happens to be Cinco de Mayo, so 5-5 on the calendar. But I'm also giving my 5-year plan, and it's got a 5 points in it. Okay.
Now, I don't think it's a very good look for a left-wing organization to propose a 5-year plan. Those typically haven't worked out that well. But hey, that's just me. Also, it takes a certain lack of self-awareness for Cenk to place such a strong emphasis on the number 5, given that he's associated with that number in ways that aren't too flattering to him. But if we look at the platform, 4 of the planks are specifically about communication. TYT is a stand-in for progressive media, which Cenk wants to use to overthrow legacy media and promote the left-wing agenda. Our Revolution is a grassroots organization devoted to voter outreach and education. Cenk PAC is a political action committee devoted to running ads to help progressives. And Wolf PAC is a political action committee devoted to getting money out of politics, aka ending people's ability to spend money on political ads. Justice Democrats is the only plank that is not directly devoted to communication, though that organization has also just recently started their own political action committee. The reason why the online left is so laser focused on communication is that they're convinced that virtually everyone already agrees with them. They just don't know it. If only the right people said the right combination of words in front of the right audience, then progressives would surely win. Politics is just that easy. Remember?
Politics is an easy game that we make difficult. All those overpaid Democratic strategists in Washington, D.C., they're useless. So we have the answers. Now it's just time to implement them and fight for them and be unapologetic on that front. And if you do that, the Republicans will be in a permanent minority from now until the end of time.
If ever there was an election that proved that wrong, it was the 2020 Democratic primary. Bernie Sanders had enormous name recognition. He had been running for essentially 5 years, he had a huge war chest from his grassroots fundraising network, and he ran as an unapologetic progressive. He even had the momentum of winning after Nevada. Then, things went south, literally and figuratively. While he raised the most money, Bernie was actually second in spending. Mike Bloomberg dropped over $1 billion, that's billion with a B, on his campaign, and he currently has 55 delegates to show for it. The majority of the Democratic primary voters instead decided they would go with a guy who had hardly any campaign infrastructure, and who was quickly running out of cash, and who didn't get that much positive media coverage prior to South Carolina. Now, if there's one thing that Bernie did wrong that virtually everyone could acknowledge, it's that he was a little too soft on Joe Biden. I honestly think he wouldn't have won even if he was tougher on the former vice president, but I guess we'll never know. Most voters don't find flamethrowers that appealing. Some people have made it work for them, but most voters don't care for the abrasive attitude. Let's consider Cenk's failed congressional run for a moment. Cenk made one big promise during his campaign, and that was to fight.
Fight, fighter, the fighter. I'm gonna fight like, hey, to fight, more don't fight today. Supposed to fight? No, you get in the fight, right? Be civil, don't fight. Don't get in the fight then. In sending a fighter to war is fighters. Hey, I wanna fight for you, so what are we, I gotta fight for you, so what am I gonna fight for? Fight them! A fight with a fighter for you. A fight for the people and fighter, you fight for it. Fight the Republicans. If you don't fight, you're never gonna, that'll fight for you. I'm gonna fight for you. We fight and we try.
What does he mean by that? He doesn't literally mean fight, as in a physical confrontation. He means a rhetorical battle. Fighting just means he's going to say more vituperative things more loudly, and do things that the Washington establishment deems uncouth, like calling people out for who funds their campaigns. In other words, fighting is what Cenk did during his campaign against Christy Smith.
Are you against Medicare for all because you mean it? Or are you against Medicare for all because United Health gave you money? She says she's not taking money now. She says she's not taking money now, but she's taking money from Goldman Sachs, BP, Wells Fargo, Sempra, and Koch brothers.
So, for those of you keeping track at home, fighting and $1 million will get you 5% in a California special election. Actually, that's not fair. I think Cenk is up to 6.5% now. Now, let me be clear. I'm not trying to dismiss the importance of communication or persuasion in politics. It's important for winning elections, but it's certainly not everything. And as far as actually governing and legislating goes, especially at the national level, it matters even less. Cenk's big plan for fighting when he made it to Congress was going to be like his campaign. He was going to make heroic floor speeches and call out the donors of his colleagues.
Of course, I wish I had won, right? Because we had this great plan that if I won, we'd make those speeches on the floor of the House, we'd get the spotlight, focus it on money in politics, focus it on the corruption, all these wonderful things that we wanted to do that now we won't be able to do.
This was going to arouse the animal spirits of the electorate, and that was going to launch the populist movement that was finally going to implement the progressive agenda that we all secretly want, but the corporations won't let us have, or something like that. I love listening to internet pundits play armchair quarterback with politicians, as if the difference between passing legislation you want and accepting compromises is just as simple as making some passionate floor speeches and running some good television ads.
One line they never, ever cross, ever, is calling out the Democratic leaders by name and putting pressure on them specifically and saying, what are you doing? Harnessing the will of the people who they have on their side and saying, hey, everybody, I'm rallying the troops now. Call Nancy's office. Call Chuck Schumer's office. Tell them, here are our list of demands for the next bailout bill. It would be so easy. If the Democrats actually cared about workers, it would be so easy to craft devastating ads that go after McConnell and Trump and the Republicans over this.
It's remarkable that people who cover politics for a living are so naive that they actually think Mr. Smith Goes to Washington is an accurate depiction of American politics. I don't like Bernie Sanders, but he's been trying to get progressive legislation passed for decades now. If fighting worked, then he would have done it. So what specifically do they get wrong? Well, let's look at a shirt that TYT sells. It says, progressives versus everybody. If you were to place a bet, you would have been wise to put your money on everybody. But remember, Cenk and most of the other online lefties think that progressives outnumber everybody else. And that's precisely what they get wrong. Everybody outnumbers progressives. Progressives think that they already have consensus, which is why they think they can steamroll everyone who doesn't agree with him. But they don't, which is why they're the ones who got steamrolled, and it's why they lost the Democratic Civil War they started. Politics is the art of building consensus, not grandstanding. You have to get a diverse group of people representing diverse interests on the same page. It's definitely not romantic, it's not sexy, it's not epic, it typically doesn't make for great movies, and it's certainly not easy. Our institutional politics exist to navigate these underlying realities. And the fact of the matter is, much derided establishment politicians like Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi are where they are because they're good at navigating these institutions. Let's look at a real-life example from history.
Left-wing power is not derived from technocracy and maneuvering and politicking and using the levers of power from inside. How is left-wing power exerted? That's how it's exerted. From the outside. So, a true left-wing leader harnesses the will of the people and throws around the weight of the people and uses your biggest weapon effectively. When you use that people power, you could even force people who don't necessarily agree with you to do your bidding. Who signed the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act? It wasn't JFK. It was Lyndon B. Johnson. And Lyndon B. Johnson is notorious. He used to throw around the N-word like it was nothing. So you're telling me the Southern white racist president signed civil rights and voting rights? What? How? How does that happen? Because these brilliant leaders leveraged people power and used it against all of Washington, D.C. and forced their hand and made them feel like, oh my God, we got to do something.
It's interesting that he brings up Lyndon Johnson, because LBJ was the establishment. Before becoming JFK's VP and eventually becoming president himself, Lyndon Johnson was the Senate Majority Leader for the Democrats. Yes, the Civil Rights Movement made a difference, but neither the Civil Rights Act nor the Voting Rights Act would have passed were it not for precisely the wheeling and dealing that the left so maligns today. Back in the 1960s, the most important political institutions were labor unions. Among the labor unions, the most powerful was the United Auto Workers. Lyndon Johnson was able to convince the president of the UAW, Walter Reuther, to support his civil rights agenda. How did LBJ pull that off? Well, he effectively bought the union support. As Kevin Duncan writes in Mother Jones, President Johnson wanted UAW President Walter Reuther to support his civil rights program and promised not to go on strike during the campaign. So a deal was struck. When the election was over, Johnson made good on his end of the bargain by levying a 25% tariff on European light trucks, putatively in retaliation for a European tariff on American chickens. The chicken tax is long gone, but the truck tariff is with us to this day. And that's how it's done. You build consensus through give and take, and FDR and LBJ were masters of it, unlike the modern-day online left, which seems completely resistant to any idea of compromise. And this brings me to our favorite progressive rock star, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. At one point in time, it looked as though she was building her own Trump-esque cult of personality amongst the left. As she's made overtures to the Democratic Party establishment, a bit of the shine has worn off. She has said that she'll vote for Biden in November. She's been pretty quiet on the whole Tara Reade situation, and now she's joined one of Biden's unity task forces. Furthermore, she's substantially reined in her endorsements of progressives who are primarying Democrats. Politico wrote about this shift in an article at the end of March.
Of the half-dozen incumbent primary challengers, just as Democrats is backing the cycle, Ocasio-Cortez has endorsed just 2. Neither was a particularly risky move. Both candidates, Jessica Cisneros in Texas and Marie Newman in Illinois, were taking on conservative Democrats who oppose abortion rights and later earned the support of several prominent national Democrats. Ocasio-Cortez's reluctance marks a break with the outsider tactics of the activist left, represented by groups like Justice Democrats. Ocasio-Cortez's shift coincides with turnover among top aides in her congressional office, replacing some outspoken radicals with more traditional political professionals, along with a broader reckoning on the left on how to expand Sanders' coalition after his failure to significantly do so in the presidential primary. Ocasio-Cortez's endorsement moves are not a fluke, but part of a larger change over the past several months. After her disruptive burn-it-down early months in Congress, Ocasio-Cortez, who colleagues say is often conflict-averse in person, has increasingly been trying to work more within the system. She is building coalitions with fellow Democratic members and picking her fights more selectively.
Some lefties absolutely hate her.
The Justice Democrats are exactly what they say. They're f***ing Democrats. Every goddamn one of them is voting for this. Every one of them, and not one of them is calling out Nancy Pelosi. They're all good boys and girls, and they don't take corporate money, but they might as well anyway.
But she's still mostly popular with the progressives, I observe. But she does seem to have been demoted from leftist savior to merely an ally.
It's to a point now where AOC is proving to us that even if she may still be an ally, in spite of the article that I'm going to read to you, her being the new standard bearer of progressivism in the United States, the new successor to Bernie Sanders, I just don't see it. I don't see it. Certainly she is an ally to us. I'm not going to discount, her value and what she brings to the table. But what she's doing here, the things that I will talk to you about based on this political article, they're very serious.
So why did she make this shift? Well, no one really knows. What we do know is that she's not the first firebrand politician of any ideology to cool down after entering the halls of power. Why does this happen so often? Well, conventional explanations are that these people get corrupted by Washington, whether it's from careerism, corporate lobbyists, or just pressure to fit in. And there's probably some truth in all of those. But I think James Carville is mostly correct when he said this. The Democratic Party is a party of coalitions, not a cult. I've observed her. I think she's really talented, that she's really smart. Maybe she is, I don't speak for her, coming to the conclusion that she wants to be part of the coalition. I definitely think that's a possibility. She may have realized that she has to build consensus with people who don't agree with her in order to get things done, rather than just grandstand and attempt to strong-arm her opponents with rousing speeches. Hopefully one day, some of her fans will figure that out too.
Why don't you fight them?